Hello and welcome back to this Greek course and especially to lesson 5. Today we'll be looking at the present indicative of εἰμί. We'll also be looking at the first declension nouns. We'll do some English revision by looking at phrases and clauses. I'll then introduce you to your new vocabulary for this lesson. And then using that vocab and the concepts that we've learned from this lesson, we'll do some parsing and translation work together. So if you're ready, once again, I am raring to go. So let's go. I'd like to begin this lesson by refreshing our memory and looking at the basic building blocks of a sentence. So every sentence has a subject, a verb, and a complement. And the complement will either complete the subject or the verb. And therefore we have a subject complement and a verb complement. The subject complement generally tells us what about the subject, and the verb complement tells us where, when, why, and how about the verb. But what I'd like to do now is speak to you more closely about the relationship between the subject and the complement. So regarding the relationship between the subject and the complement, I'd like to introduce you to the concept called the predicate and tell you the meaning of this word. It says there, the predicate is one way to provide the reader with more information about the subject. It does this by renaming or describing the subject. Point 2. So whereas most nouns receive the action of a verb, for example, a direct object, the predicate following a verb conveys more information regarding the subject. So take a look at this example. It says the teacher is I. The pronoun I is not receiving the action of the verb. Rather, it is telling us something about the subject. So in grammarian's terminology, the pronoun I is predicating something about the subject. So because it is not receiving the action of the verb, the pronoun cannot be a direct object. Rather, it is called a predicate nominative, and I'll explain that term to you shortly. All right, so the main thing I want you to understand from the outset is that the predicate conveys more information about the subject. So there are two types of predicates. We get a predicate nominative and a predicate adjective. So have a look here with me. A predicate nominative renames the subject, and I put there in brackets because it will be functioning as a noun. And then a predicate adjective modifies or describes the subject, and that is because it is functioning as an adjective. So take a look at these two examples of each one. The predicate nominative. 1 John 1 verse 5 says, "And this is the message which we have heard from him, and we are proclaiming to you. God is light." So here, God is the subject, and light is functioning as the predicate nominative because it is a noun which is renaming the subject God. And then the predicate adjective, the example comes from James 2 verse 17, where James says, "In this way, faith, if it does not have works, is dead by itself." So here the subject is faith and the predicate adjective is dead. Why? Because dead is an adjective that is modifying the subject faith. And I've just added this last point here. Did you notice the word is in these previous examples? This is a copulative verb, meaning joins together, or a linking verb. So let's speak about the copulative or linking verb in more detail. So the copulative or linking verb is a kind of verb that expresses a state of being. So sometimes you will see it being called a verb of being in English, or a to be verb. So here are some characteristics of this linking verb. It is a finite verb, and remember, a finite verb has a person and a number, so it can be conjugated. And other linking verb forms include is, are, being, was, were, etc. So all of these are different forms of the linking verb. And this really helps me. Think of it like an equal sign. All right, so based on our previous examples, God is light. We could say God equals light, or faith is dead, faith equals dead. Now that I've reminded you of the English forms of the linking verb, it's now time to turn our attention to the Greek equivalent. So it says there, now in Greek, there are common types of linking verbs. For example, the first one is eİmī, the second one is ginomai, and the third one is hupako. Today, meaning in this lesson, we are looking at eİmī, firstly, because it is the most common verb in Greek, and so therefore it's important to know. And here's an important characteristic that you need to be aware of that makes it distinct from other verbs, is eİmī has no voice. So when you pass it only with tense, mood, person, and number. Let's take a look at the different paradigm forms of eİmī now. So here are the present indicative forms of eİmī. So let's go through these together. The first person singular is eİmī. Second person singular is a. Third person singular is st with a movable nu. The first person plural is esmen. Second person plural is este. And third person plural is esin. Let me just make one or two observations here. The first one is regarding the second person singular. You will notice that the a is very similar to one of your vocabulary words that you've learned previously, which is a, and it looks like this. So you will see that the second person singular form of eİmī has a critical diacritic. All right, so this circumflex above the smooth breathing mark, which distinguishes it from the a, which means if. Then the third person singular, as you can see, it has a movable nu, which means if the letter that comes after this word is a vowel, then the nu will be there. But if the following letter is a consonant, then it will drop away. And then finally, let me make an observation regarding the second person plural. This also has a diacritical mark that distinguishes it from another word which looks very similar to it, and that is este as well. And that este looks like this, has the smooth breathing mark and the acute. So as you can see here, the second person plural form of eİmī does not have that acute. All right, so just bear that in mind. Let me say them one more time for you. So we have eİmī, a, esten, esmen, este, and asin. Okay, so now that we have looked at the various forms of eİmī, we need to now ask ourselves, how are we going to translate eİmī in the present indicative? Remember that there is no voice and that the indicative mood is the mood of assertion where a real statement is made. And in the present tense, we know that is related again to the imperfective verbal aspect. And that is when the author or speaker looks at an action as being in process or as ongoing. And therefore, we need to translate the various forms of eİmī with a linear kind of action. So let's take a look at that now. So let me say the forms for you first, just to refresh your memory. First person singular is eİmī, second person singular a, third person singular esten. First person plural esmen, second person plural este, third person plural asin. So how would we translate each of those forms? Well, firstly, eİmī, we would translate as I am. The second person singular a, we would translate as you are. Third person singular esten, we would translate as he, she, it is. First person plural esmen, we would translate as we are. Second person plural este, we would translate as you are. So as you can see, in the English, you would only be able to discern the difference from the singular and the plural based on the context. But if you know the Greek, it's a lot easier to do because the verb endings are very different. And then the third person plural, asin, we would translate as they are. And just here's a note to remind you that the verb will agree, remember that is concord, with its subject in person and number. Alright, so if the subject is singular, then a singular form of eİmī will be used. If the subject is plural, then a plural form of eİmī will be used. Armed with your new knowledge of the different forms of eİmī, let's return to the previous examples that we looked at. So firstly, the predicate nominative from 1 John 1 verse 5. The Greek text reads ho theos phos esten. So the question I want to ask is, why is the third person singular form of esten used? All right, and the reason that is used is because it agrees with the subject, which is ho theos, God, in person and number. So when we translate it, we have God is light. And there, phos is a noun which renames the subject, and therefore it's called the predicate nominative. Take a look at the second example regarding the predicate adjective from James 2 verse 17. And there we have our Greek text, which says hutos kai he pistis eon me eke erga necra esten kath eautein. So once again, why do we have the third person singular form? And the reason is because it agrees with the subject, which is he pistis, in person and number. So we would translate this in this way: faith, if it does not have works, is dead by itself. All right, so there, dead is an adjective that is modifying faith, and therefore it is called the predicate adjective. I also want to make the final point here regarding these examples, and it says there, notice that the predicate is in the same case as the subject of the specific verse. So if the subject is in the nominative case, so is its predicate. So is that true with these examples? Well, it is, yes. In the first example, the predicate phos is in the nominative case. Why? Because ha theos, the subject, is in the nominative case. And the second example, we have, just trying to find it here, necra, which is dead, is also in the nominative case because pistis is also in the nominative case. All right, so it's in the same case as the subject of these verses. Let's practice one or two examples together before we move on. So these aren't real Bible verses. I've simply given these to you to just further reinforce our understanding of how we translate the various forms of eİmī. So the first sentence in the Greek says, ha anthropos doulos estin. So how would we translate that sentence? Well, we have the subject there, ha anthropos, which is translated as the man. And here we have estin, right, the linking verb, which agrees in person and number with the subject. And because this is the present tense, we want to communicate the imperfecta verbal aspect. So we use is. And then we have our predicate nominative, doulos, which is slave, which we translate there as a slave. So the man is a slave. So slave is renaming the man. Take a look at our second example because it's slightly different. The Greek reads eisen angeloi. All right, so here angeloi is the predicate nominative. It's not the subject. What is the subject? Well, the subject is they. And you might be wondering to yourself, where does they come from in the Greek? Remember that sometimes the subject is built within the verb. And because we know that this is a third person plural, and third person is they becomes the subject. So it's they are angels. Okay, so that is quite common in Greek. So if there is no specific subject that you can identify in the verse, then look for the subject within the verb ending. So let's now conjugate the present indicative of eİmī. And just before I do it with you, I want to encourage you not to rely on these videos for practice. Please get out a piece of paper and in your own time draw up this table and practice conjugating the various verb forms that you've learned so far. The more you write it out and the more you say it aloud, the better opportunity you are giving yourself to allow this to enter into your long-term memory. All right, so let's go through the singular forms. So we have me, and I'm going to put the various accent marks above these forms. Then we have a. Remember, there's a critical diacritic here, the circumflex. And then we have estin with the movable nu. And then the plural forms, we have es men, second person plural, este, and third person plural, a sin. All right, so one more time, let me say this for you. Eİmī, a, esten, esmen, este, esin. The next section of this lesson are the nouns. So in the previous two lessons, we learned the second declension endings. And if you remember, second declension nouns are characterized by masculine and neuter genders, and their stems end with omicrons. The third declension nouns, which we will learn at a later stage, can have any gender, and their stems end with a consonant. But in today's lesson, we are going to now focus on learning the first declension noun endings. And just to set the stage for our discussion, first declensions have feminine genders, and their stems end with alpha or eta. So let's speak about the first declension noun in more detail. So first declension nouns end in an alpha or an eta. But to further add on to that knowledge, first declension nouns are divided into three patterns. So if you have a look at the screen here, the first one is the eta pattern, sometimes called the pure eta by some Greek scholars. Next, we have the alpha pattern, sometimes called the pure alpha. And then we have the alpha-eta pattern, sometimes called the mixed pattern. So let's have a look here. The eta pattern is when the stem ends with an eta. So there's an example, graphe. The alpha pattern is when epsilon, iota, or rho come before the alpha. So here's an example of a word, eİmī, and you can see there that the rho comes before the alpha, so it's going to follow the alpha pattern. And then we have the alpha-eta pattern, and that is when any other letter comes before the alpha, such as sigma or xi. So here's an example, doxa. So we have the xi that comes before the alpha, and so this word will follow the alpha-eta pattern. So let's have a look at these examples in more detail now. Now, before we look at the various examples together, I want to introduce you to the first declension articles. And the reason for this is because the articles always accompany the first declension nouns. And the articles are consistent and do not change. So if you memorize the articles, it'll make the declining of the various patterns a lot easier. So based on the same template that we followed for the second declensions, we're going to learn the paradigms, starting with the nominative case, then the genitive, the dative, and then the accusative. Looking at the singular forms first and then the plural. So let me introduce you to these articles by pronouncing them for you. The nominative singular is he, with a rough breathing mark. Genitive is teis. Dative, te. Notice the iota subscript there. And the accusative, tein. The nominative plural is hai, with a rough breathing mark. Genitive is tone. Dative is teis. And accusative is tas. So let me say those for you one more time. Beginning with the singular, we have he, teis, te, and tein. And then the plural, hai, tone, teis, and tas. So let's begin with the first declension eta pattern. Now, before we look at the various forms, I want to make a important comment before we start, and that is that the plural forms of all the patterns are going to be the same. So that should encourage you and help you with the memorizing of these patterns. So that means that only the singular forms of the patterns are going to change. And when I speak of pattern, I'm speaking about the pattern specifically with regard to the nominative, genitive, and dative and accusative cases. So here you can see why this is called the eta pattern, or the pure eta, is because all the singular forms end with the eta. Okay. The second comment that I want to make is that with the eta pattern, the article matches the ending of the noun. So let's go through that together. So our nominative singular is hey, graphe. All right, so we see that the article matches the ending. Then the genitive, we have taste, graphes, and once again the article matches the ending. Next we have te, graphe, which matches the ending, and then the accusative singular is tain, graphane. All right, so this pattern shouldn't cause you too much problem in memorizing and declining. And let's have a look at the plural forms now. Nominative, we have high, graphi, tone, graphone, taste, graphes, and tus, graphus. And once again, you can see there that the article matches the ending of the various cases. And at the bottom here, I've said that other words that follow this pattern, here's an example of gay, because it also ends in an eta. It's going to follow the eta pattern, and we will learn the vocabulary for this word at a later stage. All right, let's have a look now at the alpha pattern. So let's take a look at the alpha pattern together. All right, the first observation that I want to make and just reinforce from the previous slide is that the plural forms are the same for all the patterns. So irrespective of which first declension noun we're working with, the plural forms are all the same. So we know our articles, high, tone, taste, and tus, and you can see here that they match the ending of the noun once again. All right, so that should encourage you and help you with declining and memorizing these different patterns. So the only variation that we are going to see is with the singular forms. So why is this called the alpha pattern? Because even though the article includes the eta, as you can see here in the nominative, genitive, dative, and accusative cases, the noun ending contains an alpha instead. All right, so the alpha is prominent, as you can see there, and consistent, and that's why it's called the pure alpha pattern. All right, so let's quickly just go through these forms together. All right, we have hey, hey mir ra, genitive, taste, hey mir ras, te, hey mir ra, and tain, hey mir ron. And the plurals, we have high, hey mir rai, genitive, tone, hey mir ron, dative, taste, hey mir race, and tus, hey mir ras. And I want to just also point something out to you that is important to know. You can see here that the genitive singular form, hamir ras, is identical to the accusative plural form, which is hamir ras. Right, so both endings are identical. So how do you distinguish between these two? Well, either, number one, by the context in which you find the article and the noun, or secondly, by looking at the article that accompanies the noun. All right, and clearly the singular and the plural have different articles. All right, so pay attention to the article. And then there are other words that will follow this alpha pattern, and that is cardia, hamartia, basileia, aletheia, and ecclesia. And we'll take a look at the meaning of these words in our vocab section. Let's move on to our final pattern, the alpha-iota pattern. I've left the alpha-iota pattern for last, basically because there are very few Greek words that actually follow this pattern, and secondly because this pattern is slightly more tricky to learn than the previous two. But take heart and remember that all the plural forms are still the same. All right, so look there, we have high, tone, taste, and tus, and those articles match the endings of the nouns. Right, so the only variation that we are going to see once again are in the singular forms. And why is this called the alpha-iota pattern? Because as you can see here, the endings in the noun are mixed between alpha and eta. So the nominative and the accusative singulars have alpha in them, and the genitive and dative have eta in them. All right, so let's go through this together. So we have the nominative singular, hey doxa, right, with an alpha, tes doxes with an eta, te doxe with an eta, and tain doxon with the alpha. All right, so just be aware of those two rules, that the nominative and the accusative singulars are going to be the same, and the genitive and datives are going to be the same, and both have the eta in them. And then the plural forms, we have high, doxai, genitive, tone, doxone, dative, tes, doxase, and accusative, tus, doxas. All right, other words that follow this pattern, an example is thalassa, which is not in our vocab for this lesson, but that means sea, in case you wanted to know. All right, now we have officially learned all the masculine, neuter, and feminine articles. So here is a summary of all the articles together. Let me go through them one more time with you. Starting with the masculine singulars, we have ha, tu, to, and ton, and the masculine plurals is hoi, tone, tois, and tus. The feminine articles, starting with the singular, are he, tes, te, and tain, and the plural forms are high, tone, tes, and tus. And then finally, the neuter articles, starting with a singular, we have ta, tu, to, and ta, and the plural forms ta, tone, tois, and ta. So as you can see, the genitive plural forms are the same for all the genders. So guys, please take the time to memorize the articles off by heart, because they are the key to declining the various nouns. And the article will always agree with the noun that it's modifying in gender, number, and case. A catchy song that will assist you to memorize the various articles.
Masculine and neuter articles look a lot like second declension, plus all have towels in front of them, but masculine nominative has rough breathing instead.
Masculine singular,
Ha, tu, to, ton. In the nominative the sigma is gone.
masculine plural,
Hoi, tone, tois, tus. In every gender tone is reused.
neuter singular,
Ta, tu, to, ta. Nominative and accusative the same, you know.
Neuter, plural.
Ta, tone, toys, ta. Nominative and accusative is the same again. Feminine articles look like first declension, plus all have towels in front of them, but nominatives have rough breathing instead.
Feminine, singular.
Hey, taste, tay. The vowel is an eta, it doesn't change.
Feminine, plural.
High tone, ties, tas. Memorizing all these forms are gonna help you pass. One thing that's really great about articles is that they give away the parsing of their word. If you go ahead and parse the article, then you've already parsed the word. But what if there's an article that doesn't seem to have a word? It's probably substantive, translated as a pronoun. That lone article might match up with a word that comes before it. It could be telling you what the phrase modifies, translated as that or which.
Before we look at our new vocab for this lesson and do some translation practice together, I want to go through English phrases and clauses with you because this will assist you with your translation work. So firstly, what is a phrase again? Phrases are incomplete sentences, so i.e. they usually lack a subject, a complement, or both. Clauses, on the other hand, are portions of sentences that contain or imply a subject and a complement. So there are two different types of clauses. The first is the independent clause. Independent because it can stand on its own as a complete thought. And the dependent clause. Dependent because it cannot stand alone as a complete thought. So here's an example from 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 verse 3, where Paul says, "The Lord, who will establish you and guard you from the evil one, is faithful." So in this verse, we have an example of an independent and a dependent clause. The independent clause that can stand as a complete thought is "the Lord is faithful." All right, so there you have the Lord as the subject, is your linking verb, and faithful is your predicate adjective. All right, so that sentence is independent and can stand by itself. However, this next part of the sentence, "who will establish you and guard you from the evil one," cannot stand by itself as a complete thought because it is dependent on the rest of the sentence. All right, so I hope that just clarifies in your mind the difference between the independent and dependent clauses. The next thing that I want to do with you is speak to you about the different types of sentences. And these sentences have been classified according to their components. So the first one is the copulative sentence, which we spoke about earlier on in this lesson. And that is where two substantives joined by a copulative or linking verb. And one serves as the subject and the other as the predicate nominative or adjective. So here's an example from the scriptures. John 6 verse 35, the first part of it, Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life." All right, so there I is the subject, am is the linking verb, and the bread of life would be your predicate. All right, our second type of sentence is the simple sentence, and that is defined as it has one independent clause, a subject and a complement. So here's an example from Mark 13 verse 31a, the first part of the verse. And it says there, heaven and earth will pass away. All right, so one independent clause. The third type of sentence that we get is the compound sentence. It has two or more independent clauses joined by a conjunction. So in this example, the conjunction is and the example comes from Luke 5, verse 6. So it says, they enclosed a large number of fish and their nets were breaking. All right, so you have here two independent clauses joined by a conjunction. In other words, if we took away the conjunction, we could put full stops at the end of both those sentences because they can stand by themselves. The fourth type of sentence is the complex sentence, and that is when one independent clause is joined to one or more dependent clauses, similar to the example of Thessalonians that I showed to you earlier. But here's another example that comes from Matthew 9, verse 7, and it says, and after he arose, he departed to his house. So the independent clause would be he departed to his house, because it can stand as a complete thought. And the dependent clause would be after he arose. And then the last type of sentence that we come across is the compound complex sentence. And that is when two or more independent clauses are joined to one or more dependent clauses. All right, so I haven't given you an example here, but I think if you had to turn to the Bible, especially looking at the original Greek text, Ephesians chapter 1 would be a good example of the compound complex sentences. All right, so I hope that that has been useful to you. And as you do your translation work, try and identify the types of sentences that you come across. So let's take a look at our vocabulary for lesson 5. I'll begin with all the first declension nouns. All right, so we have here aletheia hei, which means truth. Then we have hamartia hei. Notice the rough breathing mark there, so we put a H in front of it, and that is sin. Then we have basileia hei, which is kingdom. Then we have gay hei, which means earth. Next we have graphe hei, and that means writing or scripture. Then we have doxa hei, and that means glory. Then just moving down here, let's carry on with the rest of our first declension nouns. And then we have ecclesia hei, which means church or assembly. And then we have cardia hei, which means heart. All right, so those are all the first declension nouns that you need to memorize. And then we have one or two prepositions. The first one is ace, which means into or in, and it takes its object in the accusative case. Then we have ac or x, which means out of or from, and it takes its object in the genitive case. And just a note there, ac becomes ax before vowels. That's why you have two forms of that preposition. Then we have echo, which means I have. And then our final preposition for this lesson is pros, which means to, toward, with. And it takes its object in the accusative case. All right, let's take a look at our first translation for this lesson. I'll read the Greek text for us first. We have ekais de, doxon, ex, uranu, ha, huios, gar, anthropou, esti, kurios. All right, so as I've done before, I have done the parsing for us just to save time. So let's begin with ekais. So it's a verb, present, active, indicative, second person singular from eko, and that means I have. Our next word is de, and that's a conjunction, and that can be translated as but or now, and it's a post-positive. So as you can see there, it's not found at the beginning of the Greek text, but we will translate it at the front of our English sentence. Then we have doxon, which is a noun. It's accusative feminine singular from doxa. All right, so because we've learned the word doxa, it follows the alpha-iota pattern, and because this is the accusative case, it's going to have the alpha pattern. Then we have ex, which is a preposition, takes its object in the genitive case. So the object of the preposition is uranu, which is in the genitive. It's a masculine singular from uranos, which means heaven. All right, then we have ha, which is an article. It's nominative, masculine singular, and it agrees with the noun that it's modifying in gender, number, and case. So let's see if that's true. Huios, which is also nominative, masculine singular. And then we have gar, which is also post-positive. So it's not found at the beginning of the Greek text, but we will translate it in the front of our English sentence. Then we have anthropou, which is a noun, genitive, masculine singular, which means man. And then we have st. All right, so there's our linking verb that we've learned in this lesson. It does not have a voice, so I've said none. It's in the indicative mood. It's a third person singular, all right, from eİmī. And why is it third person singular? Because it is agreeing with the noun, which would be ha huios, which is also singular. And then we have kurios. It's a noun, nominative, masculine singular, which means Lord. Right, so let's do some translation together here. So we have de, which we will translate as but. All right, so but. Ekais, all right, so it's second person singular. So but you are having, what are you having? Doxon, glory. Ex uranu, glory from heaven. Comma, gar, which goes to the front. All right, we translate that as for the Son of Man is Lord. All right, so, but you are having glory from heaven, for the Son of Man is Lord. So there's our subject, Son of Man, linking verb is, and Lord would be functioning as a predicate nominative. Let's do one more example together. So I'll read the Greek text for us. We have en, te, cardia, gnosko, hoti, hi, graphai, asin, ek, tu, theu. All right, so let's go through the parsing information together. All right, so we have en, which is a preposition, takes its object in the dative case. All right, so that's why te cardia is in the dative case. And te is a feminine singular article, so therefore cardia is feminine singular as well, and that means heart. Then we have gnosko, which is a verb, present, active, indicative, first person singular from gnosko, which means I know. Then we have hoti, which is a conjunction, and we translate that as because or that. All right, then we have high, which is also an article. It's in the nominative case, feminine, plural. Then we have graphi, noun, nominative, feminine, plural, graphe, which is writing or scripture. Then we have asin, which is our linking verb. It doesn't have a voice. It's in the indicative third person plural from eİmī. Then we have ak, preposition takes its object in the genitive case. To, article, genitive, masculine, singular. Theū is the object of the preposition, which is genitive, masculine, singular. All right, so I always tell my students to look for the kernel of the sentence, which is the subject, the verb, and the complement. So how do we find the subject of the sentence? We look at what is in the nominative case. So here we have nominative, nominative. All right, now that comes after the conjunction. So we are going to expect to find a subject at the beginning of the sentence. Now there's nothing in the nominative case. All right, so we need to then look at the verb, which should probably be carrying the subject of the sentence and its verb ending. So gnosko is first person singular. So our verb, our noun is I. So let's do some translation word together. Gnosko, which is I am knowing. All right, just communicating that imperfective verbal aspect, that linear idea. I am knowing. All right. Ente cardia. All right. I am knowing in heart or in the heart that graphi, which is our new subject, that the scriptures, all right, so it's plural, scriptures, asin, are, all right, ek tu theū, are from God. All right, so I am knowing in heart that the scriptures are from God. In conclusion, I just want to give you an important note, and this is to complete the revision worksheet. So it says that in addition to completing the quiz for this lesson, please take the time to complete the worksheet called Lesson 1 to 5 Revision before moving on to Lesson 6. And you can access that as a PDF, download it, and complete it in conjunction with your quiz for this week.